Here's a guy who says that listening to Richard Dawkins is what converted him to Christianity.
You know, you discover one, you discover the next. You discover Dawkins, I discover Hitchens, discover Sam Harris, and then gradually start discovering other people through it.
Not Dennett, though, apparently. It's notable that he makes no mention of the most philosophically rigorous of the Four Horsemen, as they were called at the time.
But the influence of Dawkins was very profound. I think one of the things that really sticks in my mind from reading it the first time round, he defined faith as meaning believing something without any evidence, or against the evidence.
Which, by the way, is how the Bible defines it. Hebrews 11:1 says that faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. Sometimes apologists will try to argue that faith is based on evidence, but the Bible says the opposite.
And then gradually discovered William Lane Craig, and that was just through YouTube. There was a video of him responding to the central argument in Richard Dawkins' The God Delusion, and actually ironically showing that despite the fact that Dawkins kept saying that he's being logical and rational in his argumentation and evidence, he was just calmly picking apart the central argument of The God Delusion, the main argument upon which the whole book is meant to stand, where Dawkins sort of famously says, you know, God almost certainly does not exist. He was just showing that the conclusion doesn't even follow logically from the premises of the argument. It's got premises in there that undermine science itself, and that Dawkins is fundamentally question-begging because he's assuming that the only kind of designer that you could invoke to explain the universe would have to be one that is also composed of lots and lots of bits of complex material pieces like the universe is.
Well, of what else could a designer be composed? What else is there to be composed of, if not material bits? I don't think it's question-begging to presuppose a designer must be, in this sense, physical. Because for anything to be, it must have location in space-time, which is to say that it's physical. One can infer the physicality of any being from the very nature of being itself. What would it mean for a designer to not be physical? What does it mean to say that any non-physical entity exists? It seems like a contradiction, and it isn't question-begging to begin one's reasoning about a subject with the axiom that contradictions aren't true.
And when you think about that, that is just question-begging. Because if that's the only kind of designer that could design the universe, then that would mean that atheistic materialism or naturalism would already have to be true.
Yes, given the nature of what it means to exist, it is a contradiction to say a timeless, spaceless, disembodied mind exists. To refute this, an apologist would have to provide an alternative definition of what it means for something to exist. And in at least 10 years of listening to professional apologists, I've never heard a single one of them do this.
And he's not done anything to address the immaterial, transcendent, divine mind and that kind of stuff. So
perhaps Dawkins hasn't explicitly pointed out the incoherence of these ideas, but what he has done is repeatedly assert that there is no evidence for any such things. And I don't see why that doesn't count as addressing them.
I was aware for a while that there was this thing going around the internet of what about if Dawkins and William Lane Craig had a debate? That would be really good. Because, you've got the foremost atheist in the world, and then you've got what appears to be, the most rigorous sort of foremost defender of Christianity there. It makes too much sense that surely they ought to have a debate or a dialogue. And indeed, it made the most sense because actually Dawkins has interacted the most with the classic arguments for God's existence in The God Delusion. He actually goes through some of them. And these are arguments that Bill Craig has been defending, long before Dawkins arrived. This goes back to, I think, the 1970s or 80s that William Lane Craig was working on the cosmological argument. So
I don't think it makes much sense for Dawkins to debate anybody on a subject other than biology. I wouldn't be interested in seeing a debate between Dawkins and Craig about philosophy because Dawkins is not a philosopher. The only good parts of The God Delusion are the parts about evolution. In the parts in which he tries to refute the main philosophical arguments for God, he gives flippant dismissals of the most facile expressions of those arguments. Philosophers have pointed this out to him, and Dawkins addressed this by citing Stephen Hawking, who said he was told that the more mathematical equations you put into a book about physics, the lower your book sales. Dawkins says that this is also true for abstruse philosophical arguments. This is probably true, and may be a major reason why Daniel Dennett's books sell far fewer copies. Dennett, however, is someone I'd much rather see debate Craig, given that he's actually a philosopher. Although I'd prefer the debate to focus on the nature of consciousness, which is Dennett's area of specialization. Whenever Craig debates someone who is an expert on a topic that is the subject of the debate, they mop the floor with him. This was particularly the case when he debated ethics with Shelley Kagan and physics with Sean Carroll.
Professor Dawkins, you are arguably the world's leading apologist for atheism, and you have been invited on several occasions by arguably the world's leading Christian academic apologist, Dr. William Lane Craig, to engage in debate. I would like to know why this is not an example of the new atheists doing what Lord Harries has described as avoiding the strongest possible arguments from the opposition.
Okay,
Thank you.
That's a very straight question. Over here now.
I have always said when invited to do debates that I will be happy to debate a bishop, a cardinal, a pope, an archbishop. Indeed, I have done both. But that I don't take on creationists, and I don't take on people whose only claim to fame is that they are professional debaters. They've got to have something more than that. I'm busy.
He gave his answer with a number of excuses in there. Some things about only debating bishops and stuff, which he's debated non-bishops.
He didn't say that he only debates bishops. He gave a few examples of the kind of folks he debates, and it clearly wasn't intended as a complete list. The only people he excluded were professional debaters and creationists.
He says he didn't debate creationists. William Lane Craig is not a creationist.
Dawkins didn't say that he is a creationist. He just gave that as an additional example of the kind of folks he won't debate. However, I think that Dawkins ought to primarily debate creationists because those folks are the ones who Dawkins, as a biologist, is best qualified to debate. I would say, however, that Craig actually is a creationist. He doesn't believe in a literal interpretation of Genesis, but he is what's called an old earth creationist. He believes that God created the universe and guided evolution, and in fact he believes that evolution alone could not produce humans without divine intervention. He also believes that there was a literal Adam and Eve from whom all of humanity descended. If Craig wants to debate Dawkins, I think Dawkins ought to debate him on those ideas. I think Craig would learn a thing or two.
And then eventually you even came on the show at one point, once we'd gotten to know each other a bit online. I think it was to do a discussion on original sin.
Yeah.
Any memories from that and where you were in your journey at that point?
Yeah, well, I think I was almost on the edge of becoming a Christian, but that issue was hanging me up a bit. I was finding it a bit hard to compute, the idea of... it all seems to go back to this idea of original sin and that some fundamental thing happened of some kind, which meant that for want of a better term, the default factory setting, almost, of humanity was that we are going to sin.
That still doesn't make any sense to me. How does a person sinning cause all their descendants to sin? How did Adam's supposedly free choice to sin alter his DNA in such a way as to make sinning hereditary? And if sinning is our default factory setting, then how can we justly be held accountable for it? How is it our fault?
I was probably ready... intellectually or mind-wise, I was probably ready to become a Christian about a year before I actually became one. Because I'd made all sorts of really stupid lifestyle choices near the end of university as well. I wasn't planning properly what I was doing. I sort of embraced almost a kind of hedonism in a way, because of course the Atheist Bus campaign of 2009 said there's probably no God, stop worrying and enjoy your life. Well, I kind of had taken, not necessarily from their prompting, but I kind of had gone down that route of, this stuff's all too big and confounding and confusing and there's so much pressure going on at university. I think I will just enjoy my life, thanks, and just kind of went a bit crazy with what I was choosing to do in that way.
Oh no, he was enjoying his life. What a horror that must have been.
So I just think that I had got myself rather embedded in lifestyle choices that weren't compatible with Christianity. I knew I would have to give them up.
Maybe this is why so many apologists say that atheists don't believe in God because they just want to sin. It's projection. They're assuming that their experiences are everyone's experiences. It isn't the case that I don't believe in God because I don't want to stop sinning, because even if I did believe in God, I doubt I would stop sinning. You can accept the idea that a God exists without accepting the idea that you owe him obedience. If I were a theist, I would be a defiant theist.
That's right. Well, I think I describe it almost as William Lane Craig and other apologists, but I think William Lane Craig primarily, through his work, had built me up to this point of being able to, embrace Christianity from, the evidence and, the arguments that he'd given, all of that equipping. He'd kind of brought me to the edge of it. And then I think his wife, Jan, through a little conversation, just gave me that little extra to sort of that little extra nudge. It was, she was just, sort of talking to me, had sat down next to me at the first debate of the tour, and did say, thing is, Pete, with becoming a Christian, if you can't give everything to Jesus, if you can't give him everything, don't do it. You'd be better off if you stayed an atheist.
Giving everything to Jesus sounds like surrendering your reasoning to biblical doctrine. William Lane Craig says that the proper use of reason when you're a Christian is ministerial as opposed to magisterial, by which he means that reason should serve to rationalize Christian dogma, and that it must never be used to judge or interrogate that dogma. This is a surrendering of one's rational faculties altogether. Is that what this dude means when he talks about giving everything to Jesus?
To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.